Welcome back to Reality Asserts Itself. I'm Paul Jay. This is the Real News Network. Thomas Frank, in his book Listen Libero, wrote, Democrats have fancied themselves as the party of the people since the beginning, squaring off against what they love to caricature as the party of the highborn. This populist brand positioning has served them well on many occasions, as Mitt Romney can no doubt attest. On other occasions, it has had about as much to do with reality as the theory that the moon is made of green Play-Doh. After all, the party of the people was also once the party of slavery and the party of the Klan. Now joining us in the studio is Thomas Frank. Thanks for joining us again, Thomas.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
So one more time, Thomas is a political analyst, a historian. He writes for The Guardian. His most recent books include What's the Matter with Kansas and the most recent Listen Libero. Thanks for joining us.
Sure thing, Paul.
So over the course of these discussions, and if you haven't watched the earlier segments, I suggest you do, because it kind of sets all this up. And we've talked about the Democratic Party as a class party, or classes party, perhaps. I mean, you do have working class representation there. The unions, for better or worse, do represent sections of the workers, although certainly a real minority of the workers now are.
Yeah.
And certainly the urban workers mostly vote Democrat. This meritocracy you talk in the book, the sort of higher end of the professional class, and much of whom manage the political system on behalf of a section of the billionaires and so on. But that's what the party is. I mean, in my view, I don't think the party's really been, even including Roosevelt, all that much other than that in terms of class composition. But the balance of forces were very different. The unions had more clout. There was a mass movement. Frankly, whatever the Soviet Union actually was, there actually was an alternative system, at least in people's minds. There's a lot of things going on in the world that made this dynamic between this professional class, the elites, and the system different back then as now. But it is what it is now, which it is a Clinton-esque party now. Even the most minor fights by the Sanders camp, and at a time when Bernie Sanders is by far the most popular politician in the country by like 70% approval ratings or something, he can't even get his guy elected chair of the DNC. They can't get the chair of the Democratic Party. And apparently when they were having the election for chair of the DNC, Obama's working the phones to get Perez elected and fighting to keep corporate Democrats in power.
That's right. You got to remember one thing about the centrist faction of the Democratic Party, which is that they absolutely hate the left. Hate them. It's not like, well, we'll compromise with these people and because we're both in the same party and we sink or swim together. No, they hate these guys.
And do they hate these guys because it's in their interest to hate these guys, and/or because they think they're naive?
There's a lot of
making
contempt.
Demands that are not
that's
possible.
Exactly right.
They're not the realists.
Exactly. And there's a certain amount of contempt whenever they are moved to talk about people on the left. I mean, Rahm Emanuel, brought him up now 3 times. Rahm Emanuel is a perfect example of this, but there's many examples. Remember, the Democratic Leadership Council, which Bill Clinton came out of, was set up deliberately to sort of diminish the power of the left wing of the Democratic Party, and they succeeded. And if you go back and look at the things that they, in their heyday, said about the left wing of the Democratic Party, it was just utterly filled with contempt.
Well,
it's not that we need to compromise with these people. It's like these people need to go away.
Well, let me make their argument, because I'm speculating this is how they feel about it. That the right wing of the American elites are essentially fascist. They've been able to win over, with cultural wars, sections of the working class, and they are barbarians at the gate.
No, they're here. They're in the gate.
I'm talking Obama years.
Yeah,
I mean, they
okay.
they're through the gate now, and they have been in many state legislatures and Congress. But at any rate, barbarians at the gate. Give me the metaphor.
Okay.
And you can't fight them with your naive approach like a Bernie Sanders, that you're going to have health care for all and all this. You need us because we actually understand that America is essentially conservative, likes this kind of militarist strength, and likes cops and all that. And if you don't have us playing that card, you're going to be dealing with the real fascists.
Yeah. Unfortunately, America also, unfortunately for them, America also has a radical tradition. I mean, this is, it's deep in the American grain. Our hatred of aristocracy, our hatred of hierarchy, our deep, deep faith in the common people. At least where I come from, the part of America that I come from, that is who we are as a people. And the Democratic Party needs to understand that. The other thing the Democratic Party, and this is, by the way, you touch on so many interesting points when you bring this up, because we have to remember one thing about the Clinton faction, and these are the people who just lost the election now, okay? They got to do everything their way. They didn't even put Bernie on the ticket, and they lost. They did everything their way, and they lost. This is the victory faction in the Democratic Party. This is the faction of the Democratic Party that rose to power saying, oh, look at Carter, look at McGovern, look at Walter Mondale, these losers. Liberals. Oh my God, liberals are so bad. Liberals can't win a damn thing. You need to put the professionals in charge. You need to put the people that understand politics and that are willing to, what was Clinton's term, triangulate. To cut deals with the right wing, to even enact Republican legislation. That's how you win. And so for them, the entire purpose of this faction of the Democratic Party is victory. That's what Clinton was all about. Remember all the compromises they weren't compromises, all the things that Clinton got done as president, which were all Republican measures. The whole point of those was to get Clinton reelected.
And the main anti-Sanders argument was, I can win and he can't.
Well, they lost.
Yeah.
They lost. And they cheated in order to lose. They cheated Sanders in order to lose.
Oh, they only lost because of Putin. They would have won otherwise.
Yeah. But that is, we need to keep that in mind going forward, because that's what Democratic centrism, that's their trump card. We win elections. They don't win. The Democrats are in a state of, by the way, the centrist faction has controlled the party for a long time now. They are in a state of wipeout across this country, worse than I have ever seen in my lifetime, going back to the 1920s. And this is the work of the victory faction in the Democratic Party. Clearly, there's something wrong with their victory strategy.
And it seems to me Sanders' campaign exploded two fundamental pillars of this faction, the victory faction, the Clinton faction. Number one, he exploded that you need billionaire money to campaign. And I don't think this whole political system was ever created in a way that you could raise so much money on the internet. It's just changed the scenario.
Huge. But that's also Trump. Hillary outraised Donald Trump 2-1. And Trump is a billionaire, and Hillary outspent Trump 2-1. I was at the Democratic convention, where they've cut all these deals with the various corporate sponsors. The appeal to corporate America and to Wall Street was overt, and especially Silicon Valley. They had a deal with Uber at the Democratic convention, and Big Pharma, and all of this stuff. And with that, and by the way, this was the logic of Clintonism. We can't be a national party. We can't contest national elections unless we can raise as much as the Republicans. We can match them dollar for dollar in fundraising. That's what Clintonism was all about. We will sacrifice the tradition of the Democratic Party. We will sacrifice liberal issues. We'll sacrifice progressivism itself on the altar of fundraising, because we got to have that money to make those TV commercials to compete with the Republicans. Well, they sure as hell did it this time. She outraised Trump 2-1 and lost. She sacrificed every principle. She had the neocons at her convention, as I mentioned, Uber, Big Pharma, Wall Street. Everybody is getting what they want out of Hillary Clinton. She still lost. This is extraordinary. What happened this last year?
And then the second pillar, which I think Sanders has greatly shaken, at least, is one of the cores of this meritocracy was very, what's the word, militant anti-communism, anti-socialism.
Yeah.
And, we'll be as hawkish on that as the Republicans ever could be. And this guy comes around running as a socialist and practically beats her.
I know. It's funny, but I wrote a story for Harper's last year about the Washington Post and its war on Bernie Sanders, and I read every op-ed and editorial they ran from January to June of 2016 that mentioned Bernie Sanders, and counted them, pro and con. They were 5-1 against him. They really disliked this guy, really profoundly disliked this guy. And I tried to understand why they disliked him so much. And a big part of it was who he is, and that he would call himself a socialist and things like that. But there's also this element where What Sanders represented to the Washington Post, and I think also to mainstream Democrats, was a return of the repressed. The sort of grand story of Clintonism is this new generation coming up out of the 1960s and saying, this is the end of the New Deal. The New Deal ends right now. And there are all of these stories written about this in the 70s and 80s. And Bill Clinton, that was the narrative of Bill Clinton's administration. He is killing off the New Deal. And by the way, when I say that, I mean in books and articles written by his admirers. Not by people who are criticizing him like me, by his fans. They're like, Bill Clinton has finally delivered us from the dead end of the New Deal. Where here comes Sanders, and who's his favorite president? It's Franklin Roosevelt. What's his political agenda? It looks like the Democratic platform circa 1948. It's basically the same thing. That's who he is. He is a return of that Democratic tradition that this current generation, this ruling generation of professional elites, think that they have put behind them forever, and it's unconscionable to them that this political philosophy could stage a return.
Because they think it's naive not to allow capitalism to be unleashed.
Yeah.
Because it gives rise to
this is the Washington Post
it gives rise to productivity.
Yeah.
Globalization will raise all boats.
Yes.
And the world
Free
will
trade,
go
yes,
to
all that
nirvana of everyone having more, except it didn't work out
We're
that way.
We're living in the greatest of all
Except it's all
possible
a big
worlds.
bubble.
We've figured out, there's only one way to run an economy, and we know what it is. And we've got Larry Summers here, and he'll tell you all about it. We got Tim Geithner here. They got it all
Until
figured
welcome
out.
to the crash of 07, 08.
Yeah, exactly. But but that shook the faith of all sorts of people, by the way. And that's always what's in the background of all of these stories. That's what makes Bernie Sanders possible. That's what makes Barack Obama possible. It's also what makes Donald Trump possible to a certain degree, is unfulfilled hope, if you will, from 2008. I mean, that hope curdled and turned to a kind of despair, if you ask me.
So it's pretty clear that the Clinton-esque corporate Democrats do not want a Sanders-esque reform of the Democratic Party. They're fighting, actually, tooth and nail at every level of the party against Sanders' forces. And I must say Sanders' forces are winning some of these battles at local levels, for party chairmanships and things like that. We've been doing some reporting on that. There's quite a fight taking place. But is the Democratic Party, is this Sanders insurgency, Sanders challenge? There's two sides to it. Some people are arguing that it's a real insurgency and it will be a real challenge in 2020, and it could do one of two things. Sanders maybe could actually win, and or there will be some kind of rigging, worse than what we saw the DNC do in the previous time, and maybe Sanders walks. And maybe that creates conditions for some kind of third party. And or some people critique Sanders as keeping people within the Democratic Party fold, that now's the time to give up on the Democratic Party.
Yes, well, okay, so the question is third parties. And, I love third parties. Like I've mentioned now 20 times, I'm from Kansas, and this is a very populist state. And actually, one of the last big third-party movement in American history, populism, big third-party movement in the sense that it swept the country, that it elected officials at all different levels. They did run presidential candidates, but that was an afterthought. It was mainly a more local, state-level thing. And populism was big there. And that is the case all through the 19th century, by the way. If you go back and look at American political wars in the 19th century, whenever the two main parties would get too close to each other, you'd have a third-party challenge. So on the issue of slavery, the Democrats and the Whigs at the time had basically agreed among themselves not to debate this issue openly. And what happens? You have the Republican Party that rises up and says, no, this is the main issue before us and we have to debate it. And the Whigs in that case crumbled and fell apart and were replaced by the Republicans. And then you have, at the end of the 19th century, the two parties refusing to debate growing inequality, industrialization, what's happening as we become this industrial economy, and it's leaving all these people behind and it's destroying these other people, and you've got enormous labor protests and farmer protests and all kinds of, this is the great age of monopoly, and the two parties refuse to debate it, and you have a third party that rises up, populism. And in this case, they were absorbed by the Democratic Party, William Jennings Bryan, and all that stuff. And here's what's fascinating. After populism, by the way, this is so what I'm describing before I go on into what happened to populism. This is an important feature of the two-party system. That when the two-party, you understand in game theory, the two parties coming together and deciding to have a consensus and not to debate certain things, this is going to happen. And so you need this outside competition to keep things honest. This is an important element, is that you have to be able to form third parties and challenge these two guys when they do this, because they're going to do it. And they're doing it right now. I mean, up until this year, all of the, like, say, the issue of trade and globalization, the two parties everybody in charge in Washington, whether it's Bill Clinton or whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's George W. Bush or whether it's Ronald Reagan, they all think these trade deals are great.
And they
all agree on them.
And they still all agree on most of the foreign policy positions.
And this is, by the way, and this is you could say that this is the same on budgetary issues about Social Security. There's all sorts of issues where there's this consensus between the two parties in Washington, D.C. that the general public of this country does not agree with. There's a whole bunch of these things, a lot of foreign policy stuff where the two parties are in agreement and the public doesn't agree at all. But they keep this consensus by agreeing with each other within Washington, D.C. How do you smash that? Well, in the 19th century, you had third parties. Unfortunately, after populism died down, almost every state in America passed laws forbidding the various electoral techniques that the populists used and that other third-party movements.
For example?
It's called fusion. It was a technique they used to use at the state level in order to win elections. So in the South, they would align with the Republican Party. In the South in the 1890s was not very big, but there were still a lot of people that voted Republican in the South back then. And in the North, in a place like Kansas, they aligned with the Democratic Party, and they would cross-endorse each other's candidates, and they would win this way. And that's illegal now. There's no good reason for it to be illegal. It's just the two parties, they never want that to happen again. They never want someone to be able to build a third party in this way. And that's how third parties used to always be built back then. And you can't do that now. And that makes it, as a result, it's extremely difficult to build a third party. You can run a candidate for president, like a Ross Perot or a Ralph Nader or something like that, but to build a real third-party challenge in every state, all over the country, building local power, electing members of Congress, governors, that kind of thing, that's pretty much impossible. And so what that leaves us with is that...
Well, let me just give some of the argument that the internet and Sanders' ability to raise money this way and this kind of explosion of a mass movement around Sanders, that's something new. And
it is.
And that could create the conditions for something like this.
Yeah, I mean, things change, and I would love to see that happen because, as I said, when you have a situation like you've had for the last 20 years where the two parties are in agreement on this whole range of issues and are keeping the public from expressing their will on these things, you need third parties to rise up and challenge them. By the way, this is one of the secrets of Trump's success, is that he did shatter the consensus on the trade issue. And if you ask me, as I've mentioned now already, that's one of the most important factors in getting him elected.
He also threatened a third party.
Did he? Yeah, that's right. He did. I forgot about
more or less.
That's right. That's right. By the way, the Republican primaries were a lot of fun in 2016. That was kind of fun to watch. Remember how much money Jeb Bush spent trying to beat Donald Trump, and then.
I mean, the problem in 2020 is going to be back to the Trump scenario, except I think it could, in a sense, even worse. In fact, because just my personal speculation, I think it's going to be Pence in 2020, not Trump. And you're dealing with a full-blown...
It could be Cruz, or it could be...
could be, but guessing Pence and a full-blown, far more efficient, not clown-like, and actually more dangerous.
Yes.
And that's going to be difficult when you're trying to propose any idea of a third party, because then you're going to get back to the scenario we just saw.
By the way, this is something Democrats need to think about that I've been trying to bring to people's attention so far in vain, which is that Trump is a buffoon, and Trump may be done for, and Trump may get impeached, and Trump may not run for re-election or whatever. Trumpism is here to stay, and Trumpism. I mean, Trump is in some ways the worst bearer of it. He's a terrible politician. I mean, his rallies. He's a pretty good speaker, and I guess a lot of people found him inspiring. But the idea of running for president, going down the list of ethnic groups and insulting them each in turn, that's idiotic. You know, picking a fight with Miss America or whoever she was, you know, boasting about how he gropes women, this is insane. He gave the Democrats so many gifts, you know. The next Trump, the next person to carry the banner of Trumpism won't make these mistakes. I'm telling you, it'll be someone like Pence, who's a professional, or someone like Ted Cruz, or who's the senator from Florida who ran last?
Rubio.
Yeah, Marco Rubio. These are guys that know what they're doing, and they will use Trump's appeal, this kind of national populist, national economic, you know, economic nationalism. They'll use that appeal, but they won't piss people off, and that's going to be hard to stop.
Yeah, we interviewed a guy who voted for Trump in Dundalk, just outside of Baltimore, and he was saying, we asked him, why'd you vote for Trump? And he says, well, I know he's a liar. I know he's a clown. And I voted for him anyway. Now, what does that tell you about what I think of the whole political class?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, we're going to continue this series of interviews with Thomas Frank, so please look out for them on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.